Let's talk a little bit about hope for the future. It seems that protests and uprisings in Iran are becoming more and more frequent. This young generation, you call them the Gen Z in Iran, they aren't afraid to stand up to the government, a little bit at least. Like, what's different about this generation of Iranians? What's the best optimistic case for the future of where this goes in Iran?
I think this generation has proven that they have a common agenda, or they have a common means of coming out of this nightmare by sticking together, that being in one voice, that backing each other up. And that sense of unity is always crucial. Whenever you're fighting a Goliath, it can't be a singular group or organization. You have to bring as many people to equal the playing field. This is where part of it is what we need to do as Iranians. How do we go about this? How we understand that today, while we know that there are differences of opinion, and that's normal, but what is the priority? Our national interest is for all of us to fight for an opportunity to liberty and justice, which is why we all have to be rowing in unison in the same boat. This is why I think the external component is also key, because I haven't seen any successful movements based on civil disobedience without involving foreign elements in terms of war on that.
Even America needed the help of the French in our
Be
revolution.
successful. Well, look, we saw perestroika in Russia, and ultimately the Red Army not intervening and being an obstruction to that process. We saw the help to labor groups such as Lech Walesa and the Solidarity Movement in Poland. We saw how important it was to put pressure on the Pretoria government to put an end to apartheid and finally negotiate a solution in South Africa. And there are numerous examples. None of this would have happened without some level of tacit support from the outside free world. That's the missing element, in my view, because the people in Iran have already proven that are willing to take every risk that there is because they have nothing more to lose. So it behooves all of us to say, what can we do to make sure that they have the maximum chance for success while minimizing the cost for change?
So I saw you gave a speech at Oxford Union recently as well, and you had, I think, thousands of supporters show up, and you have a lot of these supporters in the West. People are rooting for you. Some of my good friends who, one of the people who runs things with Elon Musk is Persian, and he's a huge fan of yours. You're going to meet him soon. So what should these supporters in the West be doing? Like how can we, what could we be telling our government? Like how do we support Iran?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm just giving you a general idea, but there are many specific components and many aspects in how and where we can live. Some of it may be changing legislation or exception to the existing sanction laws. For instance, let's say if a family living in Seattle or Austin or London or Stockholm wants to sponsor a family of workers in Iran to be able to afford to put not starve to death because they lose their wages if they go on strike. Example. Right now, as we speak,
should make that possible.
It's very difficult to wire money back home because the sanction was meant to, block from the regime benefiting from it, but the people are also suffering the consequences. In what areas can we maneuver to make sure that at least that aspect is changed? Why do I say this? Is because, I can imagine the average American sitting and say, oh my God, my tax dollars are again going to go and finance this or that campaign. And we're tired of this, right?
For some,
we're not asking for tax dollars. We're asking, for instance, that if the Biden administration wants to release $10 billion blocked in Iraq, which is electricity revenue, which is the people's money to begin with, while releasing it to a regime that kills people on the streets, as opposed to redirect it for a better purpose. It's an executive decision. Or are there ways to repurpose frozen assets by the regime? There are areas like this. I don't know if there's some legal answers to it, but it's worth exploring it because, again, we are trying to say as Iranians that we want to do the most that we can, counting essentially on our own resources. But obviously, any lending hand is welcome. And I think that's the way that we should approach it. So what can be done? I think a lot ultimately leads to policy. I think a lot of it depends that we have bipartisan support. I tell my own compatriots who are voters in this or that country that we should take a page, an example out of the Israeli experience, because as far as it comes to the Jewish communities around the world or the Jews in Israel, it was always, look, we expect nothing short of bipartisan support for our interests. So same thing goes for Iran. I don't want Iran to be the subject of partisan conflict between the Republicans and the Democrats. Supporting liberty in Iran should be a common agenda on both sides of the aisle in this country.
And I hope so too. I don't think there should be a partisan issue. I think everyone in America is seeing even more what this Iranian regime is doing, obviously, and hurting us and attacking us. And we also see that there's some young people in Iran who are on our side that we need to be supporting. What do you think the catalyst is going to be? Is there going to be a catalyst in the next few years that kind of gets everyone to push and fight here?
Well, I certainly intend to play an active role in addressing a sort of campaign that mobilize as much as we can a coalition of the willing and capable people who really see eye to eye into going in that direction, whether it is between now until the regime ultimately collapses, but also to have a very clear game plan and strategy for the post-regime interim process. Because everything that I'm talking about ultimately, my vision of transition, democratic transition, is very simple to explain. And I'm simplifying it, of course. Clearly, after the collapse of the regime, you have a period of transition that could last a few years, 2, 3, 4, hard to put an exact time on it. So there has to be an interim governance of the country. So how are we filling the boxes? What is the responsibilities of interim government? Is there a plan for the first 100 days? The country cannot stop functioning. That's where I was talking about including the existing civil bureaucracy into part of the solution, but also to prepare the stage for the election of a constitutional assembly. Why? Because this constitutional assembly is where there's not absolute consensus on the ultimate result. There has to be a parliamentary process where you debate different aspects, you write a new constitution, you give people an opportunity to understand what is being presented. Unlike 45 years ago, by the way, people had no clue what they're talking about.
No idea. Well, these things are hard when they first get going. In general, Israel also messed theirs up where they didn't even do the constitution, right? So this is a good lesson to.
We have legal experts, we have economists, we have a whole host of people who can bring in all sorts of good ideas. And I think it's important. It's important to include people in the process. I don't want to see one of those scenarios that some people make decisions behind closed door. I see it more like a C-SPAN type session where you can see the ongoing deliberation of people's representative in the Constitutional Assembly. So everybody understand what's really happening. They have to partake in that process. And I think that what a beautiful thing it will be that for the first time in Iran's history, Iranians will be able to say, you know what? We have defined and decided our future based on our own resolve. It's not inherited. It's not imposed. It's not as a result of a foreign intervention. We, the Iranian people, have been able to finally bring an era of true democracy to our country.
Well, this is a beautiful vision for the future. And if I may say, your leadership's very inspiring. You're really showing what it means to be a prince and to be a leader, because you've had this very difficult situation put upon you, and the way you've responded to it and are fighting for your people is something all of us admire. So thank you very much for joining us.
And I've always said, look, I'm utilizing this political capital you have vested in me to liberate you. I'm not looking for any personal interest out of it or any position for myself. But if you trust me to be your transition agent, that's what I'm here for. And it's the only thing that preoccupies me day and night. Help manage this transition to a successful end.